Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Autocar Professional Dialogue. Our guest today is someone who needs no introduction, I would say, because he has spent no less than 40 years in the automotive industry across vehicle segments. And now his latest role is that of Executive Vice Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Switch Mobility. I'm talking about Andy Palmer. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
It's our pleasure too. And Andy, to start off with, 2014 is when Switch, then Optare, now Switch Mobility, rolled out its first electric bus in the UK market, its home market. Now, with the under the new scheme of things, which in other words is all the electric vehicle activities of parent company Ashok Leyland, along with Optare's own, clubbed into Switch Mobility. What is the game plan? If you can share with us in a nutshell.
Absolutely. So you characterize it very well. Ashok Leyland had a significant EV capability in its facilities, mainly in Chennai. Has been selling electric buses for a little while, I think 3 years. In the UK, Ashok Leyland and Hinduja Auto owned a company, fully owned a company for about the last 5 years, which was called Optare. What we've seen in the UK is that basically all buses have basically transitioned from diesel to electric. So Optare was already pretty significantly EV. I've started working with Ashok Leyland maybe 12 years ago, became a independent non-executive director about 7 years ago. But in the last year, I was advising the board in terms of opportunities from a non-executive point of view. And I came along and said, look, you've got these two units, both very advanced, but not working together. And very, very clearly, if you're going to compete against the Chinese, then you need to leverage economies of scale, among other things, and also have a strategy that's all joined up. So basically, we came to the conclusion that basically we would pull these two units together, make one company called Switch, and that we would make a subsidiary of that company, which would also take care of mobility as a service. Very important, particularly in India, where India is really leading the charge in this type of pay per kilometer. But it will go, I'm pretty certain it will go everywhere. It become the normal go-to-market all over the world, I'm sure. And so that's what we've been doing. And you know, at the same time, sort of looking at the business, looking at the opportunities, we're pretty convinced that there's a significant opportunity here, both in the bus market, but also in the light commercial vehicle market. As you know, if you look at all of the data all around the consultants and everything, they'll all tell you that this so-called last 1 kilometer is the fastest growing part of the total automotive sector. And since we've been around for a while, and since we've got the cuts and bruises and all of the damages of having launched these vehicles, we're already selling our Generation 3 bus. You know, we've learned how to engineer these vehicles, manufacture these vehicles, and the go-to-market for these vehicles. And as you know, light commercial vehicles in particular is a strength of Ashok Leyland right now, and electrifying that is an obvious next step. So, you know, having sort of coordinated as a non-executive director this activity, yes. I got really excited by it. It sat very, very, very close to where I want my future interests to lie, all around net zero carbon. We've turned Switch into a net zero carbon company, and you know, I really fancied a crack at it. So they were kind enough to invite me to become the executive vice chairman and chief executive, and of course I jumped at the opportunity.
And wishing you all the best in this role. And Andy, where you mentioned the phrase net zero carbon footprint, which means something beyond electric
Way behind. You know, the industry talks about zero emissions and no tailpipe. You know, basically, when I started the Nissan Leaf, it's 15 years ago, and that was the message that we were sending, which was basically it's zero emissions. But we've moved forward 15 years. The planet has moved forward 15 years. The climate crisis is so much more intense. And we have to recognize that it's not just about the CO2 or the particulate that emits from the vehicle. You've also got to take into account the significant CO2 expended in manufacturing the vehicles. And that is particularly true for batteries. Batteries take a lot of CO2 in their manufacturing. And so you've got to clean all of that. So when I talk about net zero, what I'm really talking about is a kind of well to wheel. It's the entire carbon production from the raw material right the way through to the end of life of the vehicle. Now, we can control, under our own control, we can control the sustainability of the electric being used in our plants. In many instances, we're operating the vehicle, and so we're charging the vehicle, so we can make sure that the charge is also net zero carbon. And of course, we take care of end of life. So the challenge for us is the supply base. The supply base is not zero carbon. However, as we look forward, and we're developing a lot of vehicles over the next few years, we will only source with suppliers that have a plan to get to net zero. And then in the meantime, we offset. We buy carbon offsets basically for what they use. And that means that in 2021, I think that makes us the first net zero carbon automaker anywhere in the world, which is interesting, but also setting a precedent. And I hope leading the way in the same way that the Nissan Leaf led the way to zero emissions.
So you would like to do in the in the commercial vehicle industry, electric commercial vehicle industry, what the Leaf has done in the electric passenger car industry.
Exactly. So, you know, specifically vans, pickups, and buses, particularly urban buses. I think that why that's interesting is the quickest way, particularly to clean up the urban environment and particularly take care of particulates in the air where people are living, is to essentially take the taxis, the delivery vans, and the buses out of the play. And by turning them electric, you clean up the urban environment very, very quickly by basically embarking on a strategy of net carbon zero. You're not transferring that problem somewhere else. You're taking care of it at the root cause. And I think that's the future. I think that's the message that we need to bang on about. And that's not always only pure EV. That's equally true if you talk about hot hydrogen, which I'm a fan of, but also synthetic fuels, which I'm also a fan of. So basically that net carbon zero has to be where the industry gets its focus. And we need to stop talking about banning internal combustion engines, because internal combustion engine could be a part of that future as long as it's net zero. And the monologue has to be net zero carbon.
Net zero, right. In fact, talking about the moment you mentioned net zero carbon emission, the example of synthetic fuels also came to my mind. You know, I was talking to some years ago. I was talking to the global CEO of a tier 1 company, a European tier 1 company, and he was saying, while the inflection point for EVs could be anywhere in the, say, 2024, 25 thereabouts, but also keep in mind that after EV, the next big thing could be synthetic fuels. So is that something that Switch Mobility would actively work on, or has already maybe started dabbling with it?
We're not. We're concentrating on EV because EV is almost certainly the appropriate solution for urban buses and for vans. So that last 1 mile, and I think for the majority of the car industry, will go electric. However, there are scenarios where electric doesn't make sense. Heavy trucks, for example, aeroplanes, helicopters. Basically that area. And look, my old life of supercars, where perhaps the theatre is still important, the sound is still important, may also be an area where you have to get to net zero, but you might not want to do it with electrics. And in those areas, I think particularly for things like heavy trucks, hot hydrogen, which is where you burn, excuse me, which is where you burn hydrogen in an internal combustion engine, is a very, very interesting solution because you're utilizing the existing sunk capital. E-fuel is the only way of really solving air transportation. So you're going to get the demand for that. I've long been a proponent of seeing Formula One move towards synthetic fuels as the champion of that form of fuel. We'll see whether that happens, but that's a way of basically improving the global understanding of what net zero is. It's not simply zero at the tailpipe, it's zero throughout the production system.
Absolutely. And so there could be multiple options offering that, not necessarily only one.
And there needs to be, us engineers and scientists, we work better under competition where we're being challenged, and so you need those challenges. If you simply settle on one technology, you get a complacency, and the speed slows down. Whereas if you've got different solutions being thrown around, it all speeds up. It's the so-called classical Moore's law.
Right. And for the viewers who may not be aware, Andy is also an engineer, so therefore, you can engage why his interest lies in not only one particular technology but multiple technologies, and the road towards net zero could be not only one but multiple options, right?
Yes, absolutely. But look, in the context of Switch, because we think that EV is the appropriate technology, then we're flat out in terms of making sure we have the best technology in our vehicles. So, for example, again, I go a little technical if you'll permit me, but most commercial vehicles tend to go down the route of the cheapest possible battery. They use a chemistry called LFP, which is basically a phosphate ion. It's good. It's a great battery, but it's not very energy dense. So in consequence, the batteries have to be very big. So you get the low cost, but they're big and heavy.
Right.
We, on the other hand, don't subscribe to that model. Our vehicles, like anything in the EV world, have to be as light as possible because EVs don't like weight. And so our structure is very much lightweight. And our battery needs to be lightweight. How do you make a battery lightweight? Well, you use a different chemistry. It's a more expensive chemistry.
Are you working on a chemistry that we are not perhaps aware of or not seen commonly in the market today?
Well, we're constantly working on optimization of chemistry because chemistry is so important. But we're using an NMC chemistry, which is a nickel cobalt based chemistry, same as you would see in, for example, a Porsche or a Porsche Taycan or a Tesla. But we tend towards the more expensive chemistries. Why? Because it allows us to bring down the size of the battery, smaller battery. Remember, we work to a mission where you know how many kilometers that you need to cover. So it's not a question of maximizing the coverage, it's making sure your battery is big enough to do the job. So we're able to have a smaller battery that brings our weight down, which is therefore naturally a good spiral. And it also allows for more space on the bus. So actually we can package more passengers on our particular vehicles, as well as being low floor, which is also, interestingly, an increasing trend in the Indian market. So as is a very technical solution to the optimization of electric vehicles, as opposed to, let's say, the cheapest solution.
Before we move to come back to electric buses and what your plans are in terms of, say, let's say, expectation for the market and all, I just want to quickly take your view on, you touched upon hydrogen technology. Now, I'm not quite sure whether you're aware. I mean, a large conglomerate in India, the Reliance Industries, has announced its plans to make huge investments in the field of hydrogen fuel cell technology. So, what scope do you see for this technology in the commercial vehicle market, especially in markets like India?
Well, as I said, hydrogen can be really divided into two basic categories: cold hydrogen and hot hydrogen. I'm a great proponent of hot hydrogen, cold hydrogen or fuel cell. Look, hydrogen is a very, very important fuel of the future in many respects. In some ways, the lesser interest is fueling vehicles. It can be used in so many other ways, not least in the production of electricity, but it can be used in so many ways. The priority really isn't using it necessarily to fuel vehicles. When you do come to fueling vehicles, it's in a car or in a bus. I think fuel cell is nonsense. Honestly, it's too expensive. In many respects, the hydrogen anyway isn't carbon free. About 99% of the world's hydrogen today is produced from oil and gas. So there's no point in moving to a clean fuel if you're just transferring the problem. I come back to this net carbon zero point. You need a dramatic reduction in the cost of hydrogen at the same time as you need to be investing in producing clean hydrogen. So it's really, really important that we don't get conned by the fuel and by the gas and oil industries, that somehow or other we're moving to something that's clean that isn't necessarily that clean. So first point. Second point is by far the most efficient way of driving a vehicle is a battery rather than any type of combustion, and certainly a battery electric vehicle is much more efficient than a fuel cell vehicle. Where a battery lets itself down a little is as you get up towards the heavier vehicles. So for me, look, to be clear, e-bikes, e-scooters, passenger cars, SUVs, vans, buses, urban buses, as sure as death and tax, these are going EV. It's on the margins where you've got the question marks: medium duty and heavy duty trucks, intercity coaches, air travel, supercars. This is the area where perhaps there is degrees of margin where I would expect e-fuel and hot hydrogen perhaps to win out, but there is still a possibility that you could go EV, and you've seen some announcements today from some of the big boys in heavy duty goods that still think that EV could make it, and then you'll see others where you'll see a very mixed message around fuel cell. Many companies have basically cancelled their fuel cell programs, but there's still some belief that it could be interesting. I've been working on fuel cells for over 15 years. I haven't found a good solution yet.
Right. And talking about battery electric vehicle technology at the heavy truck segment, the recent unveil or launch by the Daimler is quite an interesting development there in terms of adopting BEVs for that kind of vehicles. Let's see how it goes. And coming back to buses, electric buses, and if I'm not wrong, the global electric bus market is pegged to reach somewhere around in the range of 80 to 81,000 units this year, and projected to grow to about, say, over 700,000 by 2027. So if you look at the same time span, what's the kind of growth that you think Switch can really or would rather target for?
Well, look, we have a global ambition. It's not simply looking at the UK or looking at India. In India, on the other hand, of course, is a really interesting market. It's a big country, subcontinent. After China, it's the biggest, and as an economy, it's moving towards EV. So, of course, a keystone in our strategy is India and manufacturing in India. But we also, of course, we have interest in other places in the world, and we already start to have contracts with other places in the world. So perhaps with the exception of China, which is saturated right now in the electric bus area, our intention is basically the rest of the world.
So you are saying you'll have manufacturing base in India as well as in Leeds, UK. In addition to that, you may have contract manufacturing arrangements elsewhere in the country.
Yeah, you know the group. We do have those kind of arrangements, and where it makes sense to manufacture locally, we would consider doing that as a CKD operation and with partners. Where else we look at the most efficient way of getting the vehicles there. Our great strength, though, is basically having an industrial footprint in India, which is so important. Now, you know my background. I know very well that you can make very high quality cars in India at the lowest cost of anywhere else in the world. I know that from my Nissan experience. So I do think that cornerstone in India, both from a sales perspective, giving us economies of scale, but also from a purchasing perspective and manufacturing perspective, is really, really important. It's a huge advantage over some of our other startup competitors.
Global ambitions, the strength of the Hinduja group, all that is quite good. But at the same time, we all know that this market of electric commercial vehicles, namely, mainly the bus, is dominated or led by Chinese OEMs, including in Optare's home market, UK. So how do you plan to tackle the strong competition from China?
It's the same as you do in the car industry. Make better vehicles. So basically, again, you know my background. My background has been very much orientated around quality, whether that quality was from a Nissan perspective or from an Aston Martin perspective. You know, my intention is that we elevate our vehicles to be recognized as the best quality, at the same time that they're also recognized as having the lowest total cost of ownership, and all of that without emitting or doing any damage to Mother Earth. So if you will, that's really is the positioning of the company. We've already been doing it for 5 years. We've already got 26 million miles on the clock. We know how to make quality vehicles, number one. Number two, we know how to do that at the lowest total cost of ownership, not the cheapest in outright purchase terms, but certainly as you look over life, because of that lightweight, because of that smaller battery, a higher tech battery, we get the lowest total cost of ownership, and we don't do any damage to Mother Earth. That's I think sets us apart from our competitors.
Okay. Before we end this interview, Andy, I'd like to ask you, what are the 3 key pillars that all switch products, switch more vehicles would be built on and released into the market? And beyond buses and LCVs, are there other form factors that you are contemplating, and maybe in the mid to long term that Switch would have in its portfolio of solutions?
Well, I think, look, with the way that the electric vehicles allow you to transform the look of a vehicle, there will naturally be form factor transformations, but very strictly, we're in that B2B market of urban buses and vans. So, you know, there's still lots and lots of work, for example, for Ashok Leyland to take care of in the bigger picture. in the commercial vehicles, as is very much these EV buses and vans. I'm going to take a liberty and say actually there are 4 pillars of any given switch vehicle. Number one is that we're proven. We've already been around this for 5 years, 26 million miles, got a lot of experience. So number one is proven. Number two is our world-class technologies, particularly in the area of lightweight, battery chemistry, and digital. One of the benefits of having a strong footprint in India is we have access to a lot of data scientists, and we already take a lot of data off our current vehicles. So step two is the world-class technology that we bring. Step three, I think, is related to that technology. It's the intelligence of both the vehicle on board and off board, and again the ability to use all of that data, that 26 million miles of data, the data that's coming to us live every day. And then lastly is net zero. All of that, you get all of that and you do no damage to Mother Earth.
Great. On that note, Andy, wishing you and your team all the very best. We have seen you in action in the passenger vehicle industry, in the supercar industry now. Looking forward to some interesting announcement and news being created by you and your team at Switch Mobility in the commercial vehicle space too. Thank you very much and wishing you all the best.
Thank you very much. Great to speak to you as always.